Today on the Cameron Journal podcast, I am joined by Burt Williamson. He has written a book called Social Security and the Three Bears, which offers a unique approach to understanding Social Security for retirement. This is ordinarily a book that I would skip because it's not offered in paper. And I imagine, I cannot totally imagine what it is, although I have seen some of it. This is, not necessarily something we would normally do, but I thought an interesting conversation about Social Security and its long-term solvency probably would be very germane to the discussion. So,
Sure.
welcome, Bert, to the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thanks for having me, Cameron, and happy Monday.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And happy whatever day of the week it is when you're finally listening to this. Yes. So why don't you start from the very beginning and tell us a little bit about yourself and about your book, and we'll go from there.
All right. Well, I am a financial planner, and one of the things over the course of my career is that, especially when I first started, what I think is everyday stuff, of course, is not to my clients. So I learned how to explain things in very easy to understand terms. And even with that, I have done webinars on Social Security and explaining how all of this works. And most people kind of put it off because it's one of those things where I don't need to understand that quite yet. And germane to what you were talking about earlier, Cameron, and that is, well, what about understanding it, getting it out of your mind so you totally understand how it works and how it's going to affect you and what's going to go on with the future of the program? Wouldn't understanding that today free up some space in your head so that you can think about other things? And it's not so much about coming up with a solution today, but I thought using something where the storytelling I used to do with my daughter when I would put her to bed. She didn't want me to read a story to her at night. She wanted me to make something up. And so just about every night, I made up a new story. And so this is kind of like that, although I never taught her about Social Security. But in terms of just coming up with fun things and using your imagination. An interesting thing was I just saw James Patterson. Last night, in fact, I saw him. And one of the things I noticed was when he was asked an easy question, he would give a yes or no. But if not, you could just see his eyes would go off in a different direction and he would start with a story. And it might have a little bit to do with what the question was, but he's off on his own tangent, and you can see why he writes as many stories as he does, because he's a story kind of guy. That's the way he thinks. And I thought with a story like The Three Bears, something where the title itself may seem a little funny, right? But having it where it can bring people in and say, well, that's interesting. The whole idea is initially to get people to say, what's that all about? How do those two tie together? And so,
well, I'm sure it can't be too complicated. It's three bears working very hard to put money into the program to support an aging Goldilocks. Case closed.
Well, Goldilocks didn't make the cut. She's not in the story. She's actually a swear word. Papa Bear is like, what in the name of Goldilocks is that? But anyway, that's the only way she comes up.
Very cute.
So
that's very cute.
So it gets into. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. How did you get into financial planning? I don't think anyone picks that career as a child.
That is true. So when I was 18 years old, I was working for my parents in Old Greenwich, Connecticut, and my uncle was visiting. He was president of a major corporation here in the United States. And at that time, he said, and he was 6'5", so I had to listen to him. He said, you should buy stock in my company. And of course, I didn't have a lot of money and I had no idea what I was doing, but I bought 10 shares of stock. And of course, being young, I made money on it and sold it too soon. But what it did was it got me reading the New York Times, the business section. And my father, working with him, it was great because he was a very smart man. And we would talk about it. And to me, it was hieroglyphics when I first started looking at it. I was like, what is this? So he had me read the business summaries, and he showed me how to look up the stock price in the paper. And then we started talking about all this. And I really kind of became a business news junkie as a result. I went on to study economics at Columbia University. We had many clients in our interior design business who were stockbrokers. And I thought, that sounds pretty cool because these people are living quite a nice lifestyle. So I wanted to know more about that too. So I interviewed with a bunch of them. And after, it wasn't until many years later when I met my future ex-wife that I got into the financial planning world. And that was part of going from working all over the state of Connecticut to saying, you know what, I need to be closer to home to be able to have a family life. And at the time that I started was in 1995. And in those days, there was no internet to go look up for a job. There was no Indeed or Monster.com or anything like that. You looked in the Help Wanted section of the newspaper. And most of the ads in those days were for financial planning. And what I didn't realize was that they were all sales positions. However, I found that there was a big difference in the training that you could receive from some of these companies. So at the time, although they've changed the name since I was there was American Express Financial Advisors. They had a fabulous training program, and I was exposed to people who had anywhere from 1, 5, 20, 25 years in the business, and they would teach us what they knew, and they did it. We weren't paying extra to take these classes. It was really just a phenomenal learning ground. And as a result, I learned by applying the interior design stuff where you tailor everything to the person you're working for, and then looking how to apply that kind of concept into financial planning is where it all took off. And I won awards for my financial plans because I wrote down, here's what you need to do. It's like, Cameron, this is your financial plan. This is about you. This is going to help you achieve your goals based on what you told me you want to have happen. And so what would happen is clients would essentially do everything that I recommended because it was only helping them do what they want to do. And that's what I'm hoping that this story does, is bring people in where they might not even want to find out about it. You're not going to go to the library and look up a book on Social Security. Some of them are that thick. And you're like, my gosh, how do I make sense of it? So I put together an 8,700 word short story. And it's the first in what I hope is a series of them. And I've started working on the next one. I've got some of my notes right here in case anybody wants to read them. We'll get to that at some point. But in terms of trying to make it easy for people to understand it, but fun, is like, hey, you know what? This is stuff that you need to know. And if you take the time, you're going to have fun learning it. And by the end of the story, you're not going to know the whole, all 2,000 pages of the tax code that applies to Social Security, but you're going to know most of what applies to you. And you're going to go, I get it. That's the whole point. But at the end, and I'll talk to you more about what you were mentioning earlier on, and that is, what's the future of the program, and does Baby Bear have anything to do with it?
Well, I mean, the sad fact of the matter, and I don't know how this affects the type of advice you're giving people. 2035 is only 11 years away. It seems esoteric and off in the distance, but to give everyone context, 2016 was 8 years ago. So, right. It will reach that quickly. And then the program starts to run out of money, and then it becomes a death spiral.
Well, do you know that back in 1981, there was this guy, he used to be an actor, and he decided to run for president after having a very successful career as a politician. This guy named Ronald Reagan. And when he took office in 1981, the trustees report from in 1981. Okay, this is 43 years ago. That report came out and said that the trust fund was going to run out of money by the end of 1983. They had less than 3 years to fix it. Right now, we're talking about what, 10, 12 years, depending on who you're listening to. So they had to go to work and come up with a solution. And the similar idea is in this story about how to fix the program with now, I don't have all the answers. All the people in the book do. And I think they'll share some good ones with you.
Yes. I mean, I think but I mean, at the same time, though, given that we don't know what's going to happen with that, and nobody in Congress seems terribly eager to deal with that, and no one's really dealt with it since Paul Ryan upped retirement age in 2014. Ever since then, no one's really wanted to deal with it.
Right.
How should, I mean, the general presumption among people my age is it will not exist by the time we are old. And you get a lot of morbid and dark humor about people talking about, yeah, my retirement plan is a 9mm and a bottle of whiskey. And so I mean, what are you telling, people in their, late 30s, early 40s who might be finally really taking retirement seriously? What are you telling them about Social Security?
Well, what I hope they will do is outlined in the book, and that although it's kind of fiction, nonfiction blended together, but I'm kind of proposing that there needs to be some kind of a movement. There needs to be some people going, hey, I'm mad as hell and I'm not going to take this anymore. You guys need to do something about it. I mean, think about with a president, they have a 4-year term. And if they're lucky, they get reelected to their second 4-year term. So now they've been in for 8 years. Well, the Social Security problem isn't supposed to be a big problem for 10 years. Well, a senator, that's a 6-year term. A congressman, that's 2 years. I mean, they're looking, and look at Wall Street. They're just looking to the end of the next quarter. Hey, can we beat our quarterly estimates? So a lot of this is really short-term thinking, but nobody is going out there saying, you know what? I think we should cut Social Security. That would be a great campaign slogan, wouldn't it?
You'll never lose a campaign faster. I mean, ever. I mean, but this is the problem is, on the Republican side, you have, a nascent movement from some crazy libertarians. Oh, we need to get rid of it. It costs too much money. It's, sort of thing. And then you have this other, movement that's like, yes, save it for seniors, all this type of thing. But the reality is neither party really wants to address the problem, because
Correct.
The only way to fix it costs a lot of money that, quite frankly, to be honest, unless we start raising some revenue, we just don't have. I mean, even something as simple as increasing the maximum income to charge Social Security tax, which would raise hundreds of billions.
Yes.
I mean, it's an idea that gets thrown around by people like me who talk on videos and do podcasts and all this type of thing. It's talked about by comedians. In fact, the first person who used it as a bit was Louis Black. But nobody in politics seriously talking about that, because
right.
it would be the upper middle class and the wealthy who end up, bearing all of that burden. And let's face it, this is America. It's not an easy thing to get the wealthy to pay for much around here. So,
but it's also a fundraiser thing. You have to think about who's going to finance your next campaign.
Yes. No, and that's what I was going to go into was, and also, good luck going to your fundraising dinner to the people writing the checks and being like, guess what, everybody, your taxes are going up bigly. And that's, I mean, yeah, nobody wants to have that conversation. Why is that? People like to get reelected. And Congress people don't want to get calls from angry donors about, I mean, it is so politically toxic. It needs to be done. And it's too politically toxic for anyone to do it.
which is why they're going to have to do exactly what Ronald Reagan did back in the 1980s. They're going to have to come up with a new committee. They're going to have to give this committee a lot more authority, whereas Congress is going to have to listen to what's stated in the report and then do what it recommends. And you pointed out probably the number one solution in terms of raising revenue the fastest and the most, which is to do away with the cap on income that's taxed for Social Security. That would fix 50, 60% of the problem right there. But you have to realize that back in 1990, they had an opportunity to do some things that they simply did not do. And there are a couple of reasons why. One is that with the Social Security Trust Fund, which supposedly has about $2 trillion in it right now, that's a nice hunk of change. However, if you look at it, there's a Treasury report that and the Treasury Department says in this report themselves, we don't even fully understand how they move the money around. But the whole idea is that Congress borrows and pays interest from the trust fund to do other things during the course of the year. So it really just becomes a piggy bank for them. So if we were to do something like this, and this is the thing I was talking about in 1990 that they could have done, they could have taken 10 to 20% of the trust fund balance and invested it. Now, I know there's a lot of people saying, well, we shouldn't do that. And then I mentioned this to a friend of mine who's also in my business a couple of weeks ago. And he said, no, we should put it in Bitcoin instead. It's like, well, wait a minute. With stock, you're investing in businesses that make money. In Bitcoin, you're investing something where it has no value unless somebody else is willing to buy it from you. But in and of itself, it produces no value in the economy. But if you went out and bought stock, and they could buy S&P 500 shares, they could do all kinds of things, but they've never explored it because that would do one very important thing. It would take the money, whatever amount that is, out of the hands of Congress to be able to play that shuffle that I call the Congress shuffle with those dollars, because they want to be able to move the money around and borrow it without having to create more taxes for the things that serve special interests. So if people better understood how the accounting worked, if they understood how the money's actually being used, that $2 trillion, if that's sitting around and it's technically not going to run out for 12 years, well, shouldn't that money be working as hard as you and I do?
I mean, that's a perilous thing. There are market downturns, there are market upturns. When you look at things like the housing crisis and this sort of thing, that already was a politically dicey situation, anyway, in 2008. I mean, can you imagine the housing market's crashed, the economy's falling apart, the ATMs might not have money on Monday. And oh, by the way, the retirement plan of last resort just lost X number of billions of dollars of value. I don't know about you, but in that scenario, I would buy pitchforks and be selling them on the street corner because I think that would cause an even a bigger political kerfluffle than not. And there's also the ethics of it can be seen as a handout to business, because ultimately the companies who have stocks in those exchanges are going to benefit from all that capital pouring into the capital markets all at once, and
which would be visible. That would be visible as opposed to what's actually happening in Washington, which is invisible to you and I. It's transparent to us, but it is not to the people in Washington. What it would do is would take that, and I'm not talking about 100% of the money, Cameron. I'm talking about 10, 20% maximum. But even if it was just 10%, what you would do, and this solution is in the story, I promise you that if Congress reads this story, if they actually were to follow what the story lays out, that Social Security would be fixed for the future and we'd never have to worry about it again. That is the promise that Baby Bear makes to you and the American public.
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult thing. And I think I mean these pension programs were set up in a different time, in a different place when, people didn't live as long in old
Right.
age. Um, Cost of living was lower. And we're not the only one facing this. There are national pension programs all over the world that are facing insolvency.
Sure.
Japan, particularly, has problems and all this type of thing. And I don't know. I feel like here's the problem, and this even happens at the state level. These programs start to become political pawns, and they start to be the funding or not of them starts to be leveraged for political purposes. And I find that particularly egregious because I think people forget it's not just a pile of money. That's someone's life.
Right.
That's whether people get to eat or have housing after they can't work anymore. That's making sure disabled people have some dignity in life, you know.
Right.
And I feel like the human element oftentimes gets left out of these conversations.
Well, the interesting thing is that that doesn't play into the whole shell game of moving the money around,
Oh,
where
of course not.
it would be nice if it had a public purpose. But the fact of the matter is that we don't even know exactly why or how the money gets moved around. But what we do know is that if there's $2 billion, I'm sorry, 2 trillion, 2 trillion, wrap your arms around that $1 trillion that's just sitting around invested in US treasuries. And by law, it has to be in US treasuries. But guess what they can easily do? Pass a new law that allows them to put that money somewhere else. And I'm not talking about rolling the dice with the money and buying futures and options and things like that. But if they were to invest some of those dollars and every 5 years look at when there are big gains, take those gains off the table, put that money back into the trust fund and just keep that 10% and constantly peeling off when there's a great achievement. And because they don't have to take it out like they're living off of it for retirement. If the longer we wait, if we get closer to that 10-year mark or 12-year mark, or whenever it actually comes about, then they're not going to have the choices that they have today. We have the choice today, and what really needs to happen is a movement. There needs to be people, instead of protesting about uh, the various things that they may at the Democratic National Convention that's coming up, they should be talking about transparency with their money. What's going on with the money that they have today? What are you doing to fix it so that this Social Security program that was designed for social security, it's like, I think they need to hear those two words over and over again. But I think people should be alarmed by this and realize that there are solutions. They're just not willing to implement them. There are some unattractive ones for people your age, for instance, that they like moving the ages out further. But I think about it this way. People are living longer, but they haven't moved out the earliest start year. They haven't moved out the oldest start year. You're still dealing with the window from age 62 to 70. That's just the way it is. And
I mean, at the same time, though, with average life expectancy at 77, I think it would be a hard argument to make to adjust those because, there's a let's also face the fact as well. If you're relying on Social Security as your primary income for retirement, you will probably tend to be middle, or lower middle, or working class.
true.
Your life
Well,
expectancy is not as long as a wealthier person who can afford healthcare and live a lot longer, who will not care about Social Security. It'll be nice extra money for them, or they might even take it, whatever have you, and go from there. So
that good point. I appreciate that. That was well stated.
Yeah, I mean, but that also, I think, to your point, I think that also makes it politically hard because, again, as we said before, the people who donate to the campaigns are stuck with the bill, and the common everyday person and voter is the person who benefits. But there's not a political upside for politicians in that
Sure.
deal.
You
It
know, I
leads to
think
pissed off donors and closed checkbooks and lost elections.
exactly. I mean, think of it this way. The top, if you make $150,000 a year or more in the United States, you're in the top 5% of wage earners. The people who make just 300,000, doesn't, we're saying just, but that's the top 1% of wage earners. The bottom 80% of wage earners, they make $75,000 a year or less. So when we talk about Social Security, the average check this year is $1,900 a month, a little over $1,900 a month. So that would be just under $23,000 a year. If that was an account that you saved up and you were taking 4% interest off of that account, you'd have to have $570,000 set aside to provide you that kind of income. That's not a small deal. That's a big deal. And that's what's available right now. But of course, if they were to, and they're going to, I think they're kind of holding you hostage at this point, the same way they do when they're looking at raising the debt ceiling as they do each year. Part of that is, it's not that important yet. We're going to wait until people are protesting, or as you said, buying the pitchforks and standing on the street corners outside the congressman's office. Then they're probably going to do something about it. But I think that something's going to happen in terms of a proactive stance. And this story does promote that in terms of coming up with a new commission like they had back in the 1980s, where Alan Greenspan was actually, before he became the Federal Reserve chairman, was the chairman of this commission appointed by Ronald Reagan. And he oversaw this commission to find out what are all the short-term problems, the long-term problems, and they had to come up with fast solutions. Like what can we do now that are the band-aids to the program, and then what can we do longer term? They fixed it for a very long time. I mean, by 1990, all three trust funds were heading upward. So they definitely made some very good decisions.
No, no. I mean, it is. I mean, I don't think it's a problem. A lot of people think it's a problem that can't be solved. I think it's a problem that can be solved. But as we've discussed, the politics around it are very difficult. And I think it's going to take, my guess is it's probably going to take a popular president, preferably in their second term, with a reasonably amenable Congress to come up with some sort of won't be perfect, but we'll get the job done compromise.
Yeah.
That will, kind of make up for it and all this, and kind of fix it. And I think honestly, I think as we come, to the end of this decade, the shouts will get louder, and there'll be kind of more cause to do something actively about the problem. I don't think we'll end up waiting as long as they did in the 80s. But I do think, given present politics, if you end up with a Kamala Harris second term from 2028 to 2032, and her numbers aren't completely in the dumpster by then, I could see somewhere in that time period being like, okay, like in 2030, okay, we have 5 years left. We really have to do this now, and then all of a sudden people start coming together and finding some sort of compromise. Well,
that's what the beautiful thing about the commission was, and back in the 80s, was that they kind of they made the no smoking sign, and Congress, they pointed and said, look, it says no smoking. You can't smoke in here. And Congress goes, oh, well, then we have to put out our cigarettes. But
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
instead of coming up and saying, "Hey, we don't want people smoking anymore," you're going to say, "Well, we don't want. We just won't reelect you." But if they can point to that no smoking sign, which would be the commission's report, now they've got a kind of an out, a way that they won't have to take responsibility for the solutions that actually get employed.
Yes, and I think that's probably going to be a very important thing politically to get the job done. So yes, I will say we're have about 15 minutes left. So this is a fascinating book. I cannot imagine writing a children's book on this subject, which I think is absolutely fascinating. Um, do you have any decent low cost financial advice for people in the 30s, 40s, early 50s who are thinking about retirement in these volatile times?
Well,
What are you recommending? What's the latest wisdom?
well, the smartest thing to do is don't go it alone. At the very least, try. There are financial advisors out there who do pro bono work, depending on your level of income. But best thing is don't think that you can figure it all out yourself. I mean, think about how many hours it takes to to figure out anything on your own versus picking up a book and saying, "Hey, look, here's Ken Blanchard's book on the 1 Minute Entrepreneur." Well, I could read this in an afternoon and get a lot of great ideas on how that works. I mean, maybe you do go get some books from the library. Maybe you talk to some. There's so many good things now. There are guys who do these 30 to 60-second TikTok videos. The smartest thing to do is don't wait to do something. Get started now. Either talk to someone who knows what they're doing. Start looking for advice online. Start watching YouTube videos. Make sure they're subscribed to your podcast and subscribe to your newsletter so that they're getting your thoughts on what's going on in the economy. Because if they're not talking or listening to smart people and they wait, the worst thing you can do is wait to do anything. Because just like with what we're talking about with Social Security, the longer you wait, the fewer options you have. As soon as you know you've got a health issue, you should go see the doctor. As soon as you think, hey, you know what, someday I might want to retire, then maybe you should start working on it today, because time is either your ally or it's your enemy. So you're best to, even if you start by saving $10 a week, or put a jar on the table and start putting cash in it and put a label on it and just say, this is retirement. Do something to be proactive. Get started today, because there's a great book, as you probably have read, is Atomic Habits. You can start with the smallest of habit. And the whole idea is just doing something on a regular basis. It's even if you only do it for a minute or two a day, start reading about it for, say, I'm only going to do it for a minute or 2 minutes, but put it on your calendar to do every single day. I'm going to work on my retirement plan. And just by that mere fact and starting it for that minute or two, chances are you're going to spend more than a minute or two as you get involved in it. You might find a book that's really useful. You might find a website or a podcast that's really interesting, and you're going to listen for a lot longer than that minute or two. But by getting it on your calendar and doing it on a regular basis, it's going to become a part of your thinking. And as you do anything, as you start making other decisions about life, the car you're going to buy or the vacation you want to take, is like, well, should I really do that? Or am I going to end up putting that on a credit card and have to take money out of my savings in order to pay that later? And what's that going to do for my long-term picture? Because if you think only from today to through your next paycheck or your next billing cycle, you could have some issues there. You know, an interesting thing I have done with young couples is, and this is not to say that you have to be on a budget, but one thing you can do is just start to look at when things are paid each month. And of course, like buying gas for your car, you might do every 3 weeks. So you make a separate line item for that. But what you want to do is look at, what do I pay on the first, the third, the fifth, and all the way down through the calendar, maybe go to the 28th. And if you start to sort out when you're paying things, and then you can sort out when you're getting paid, you can start to figure out, is there money left over? And just a simple, I don't know if you can do it on an Excel spreadsheet, maybe you do it on a plain sheet of paper, however it works best for you. But the most important thing with anything is to start. And if you do this thing where you sort your expenses out for 3 months, 6 months, what's going to happen is it's not going to seem like a chore. It's going to be like, hey, I know where my money's going. You're going to be in control. It's empowering.
I always laugh about that because I have been self-employed and a business owner for most of my adult life. And I was doing that at like 20 when I was freelancing. And I am amazed at people that don't really know where all their money goes. I'm kind of like, oh no, I review the accounts, all of them, every day. I can tell you to the penny where every single dime has gone, like all this. And I'm amazed by people that don't do that. I don't get it. I'm like, how are you existing? Like, I don't, yeah, you know.
But there are people who make tons of money who have no idea. I've done financial plans for people who make very high incomes, and you find out that they're living. What happens is they live up to the level of their income. Professional athletes do this. And they don't, as you know, their income isn't going to last nearly as long as somebody who's working in the corporate world or an entrepreneur who can work as long as he or she likes to. So what happens is they're going to have maybe 5, if they're lucky, 10 years of high income. And they have to look at what you're talking about. So like I was saying, okay, here are your expenses and here's your income coming in to cover that. But now you have to multiply those expenses by the number of years that those are going to continue. So that 5 or 10 years of income has to get stretched out over that time period. And when you start to plot things out on a timeline, so what I call timeline allocation, you put your money where your time is. So if you've got, somebody asked me one time, I was walking out to the garage and he said, so you're a financial planner, so where should I put it? Like he was testing me. Where should I put, I've got $100,000. Where should I put it? And I said, well, I don't know. What do you have coming up in the next 3 to 6 months? Do you need the money for anything coming up? Nothing in that time frame. Well, how about in the next year or two? Are you planning to buy a house or anything? Oh, yeah, definitely. I'm going to need it for a down payment. So let me ask you this. If you put it in the stock market tomorrow and your 100,000 became 50,000 at the time that you would like to go buy your house, how is that going to make you feel? And of course, that's a rhetorical question. So it's like, well, wouldn't you rather make sure that 100,000 is going to be there without that risk of, well, I hope it makes some money. So a lot, you have to look at the reality of the situation. And it's really surprising. It doesn't matter how much money people have or the car they're driving. Frequently, you see somebody driving by in a Maserati or Lamborghini, it's like they're driving their retirement plan. So Don't be so impressed by that, because there was a commercial. I don't know if you remember this a few years ago. A guy, and I can't remember what it was for, but the guy's driving around in a tractor in his front yard. He's like, how did I get all this great stuff? He said, I'm in debt up to my eyeballs.
No. I mean, I used to work in automotive, and I used to deliver cars, and I used to buy cars at auction and for shops that fix them. And nothing will ruin you on exotic cars than working for a shop that fixes them. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a whole host of high-end. I would never buy a BMW. You couldn't give me one. I would be kind of like, thank you so much for the gift. Hi, Carvana.
Right.
Listen, if I got a deal for you, send one of those trucks right over. Like, I don't want this sitting in my driveway by the end of the day. You get right on over here. Like, I would never, like, someone wanted to give me a Mercedes one time, and I'm kind of like, please don't. An oil change is $800. And fixing anything is incredibly expensive. An old used vintage one that's incredibly reliable and built like a tank, we'll talk because I can do a lot of that repair myself. The new ones, no. I mean,
Right.
same thing with exotic sports cars. Lambos, they're lovely. I love to go to a car show and look at them. But the
Right.
reality is a lot of those cars, yeah, an oil change is $12,000. Why is that? Because they have to pull the whole engine out. Yeah, no, the whole thing has got to come out. I mean, nothing will poison you on that stuff more, sort of thing.
Right. So,
The only reason I ask is I think there's a lot of professional people my age who, make a lot more money than I do because I do this. And I think a lot of people with cost of living are just struggling with having even a concept of saving money or retirement, especially with the cost of housing. If you're trying to have kids, all this type of thing, the way inflation has been, it just seems like an impossible task and an impossible idea.
well, here's a great thing that people can do. Let's say you make a big sale or you land a book deal or you get a big bonus at work. If that bonus is not factored in, or that commission, whatever it is not factored into your everyday living, then what you do is you take the after-tax amount, you give half of it to your lifestyle and you give half of it to your savings. Because if you haven't been counting on it for living, then the best thing you get, yes, celebrate the fact that you got a really nice bonus or that you made a big sale or whatever the thing might be, but give your future a raise too by giving that some of that money to invest for the future, and not something where, okay, I'm going to take it out in 3 months because we're going to have to pay for this big vacation we're taking. That should be the half of the bonus or big sale that you're spending for yourself, as opposed to the money you're saving for the future. There are little things you can do. It just, and as you know, every situation is different. So every time, like, people who lose a job is like, okay, now what am I going to do? Well, I've got great information on that. You can do informational interviews. Go talk to people who are doing what you would love to do and knock on their door. Don't ask them for a job or an internship or anything like that. But you say, hey, can I pick your brain? I'd love to know how someone like me could end up in your shoes someday. Could I buy a coffee? I'll jump in the airplane. I'll jump in the taxi to the airport. Meet you at 7 a.m. on Saturday morning at 5, whatever works for you. And you say, so it'd be like me asking you, Cameron, what do you like most about what you're doing? How'd you get into this? If you were to start again today, what things would you do differently? What's the biggest challenge you've faced? What's the biggest challenge you see coming down the road? And when you ask questions like this, that's going to help you to sort out, is this the kind of thing I would like to be doing myself? And then when you get to the end of that conversation, if this is someone, for instance, that really is doing what you would like to do, is well connected, but they don't lead off at the end with anything like an internship or a job, you just say, hey, Cameron, is there anybody else you think I should be talking to? Because now you're starting to build your network at their level. And you're talking to people. You're not looking at jobs that are advertised online or in the newspaper or wherever else they might be. You're looking to talk to people who you can type in podcaster organizations. Let's say I wanted to talk to a podcaster, or you could type in musicians and look for organizations and find out where these people are hanging out. What organizations do they belong to, and where are members? How can you find people who are doing that? And as soon as you start typing that in, or just Googling the type of person you want to talk to, you're going to come up with 3-5 people. And all you're asking is to pick their brain. You can ask me. I get asked that frequently, and I'll say, sure, happy to talk to you. But when they say, hey, are you hiring? And say, sorry, well, the conversation's over. That's not what we're talking about. I'm here to help you make decisions, and people will do that. And if they do have a job or an internship because they think you're a hot commodity, well, that could lead to something. So you want to go in looking prepared, looking your best and being ready for it, because that's going to set you up. So it's looking to your future, and you're in charge. This is your future, your brain. Nobody else can get in here and tap into your thought process. But for you to be happy or miserable is your decision. You could say, yeah, well, look at my circumstances. Anybody would be miserable if they were like this, or anybody would be happy because look at all the wonderful things going on in my life. But happiness is definitely an attitude more than it is a set of circumstances, because you can make your set of circumstances be wonderful by appreciating what you have and expressing gratitude for the warm shower you took this morning and the clean towels and having a place where you can wash your clothes and the wonderful, comfortable bed you sleep in at night. There's a lot we can be thankful for. There's a lot we can work towards, but making sure you're not, sorry, I can run on all day. So cut me off anytime you want, Cameron. But I was chortling about the whole idea and how much times have changed, and in some ways and not in others. So it was, my face was betraying my inside thoughts, as it usually does. There's lots of times when I watch this and I'm like, oh, I shouldn't have said that out loud with my eyebrow. It's very good. It's very good. So, well, we're coming up to the top of the hour, so let's stop there. Why don't you tell us about where we can find the book and where to keep track of you online? Okay. Well, I am, my business is planprep.com. It's very simple. The word plan, planning for your future, and prep. If you plan, you'll be prepared. Planprep.com. The book is on Amazon, so you can just type in Social Security and the Three Bears there. You can type in my name. The book will probably come up that way too. Burt, B-U-R-T, Burt Williamson. And you can find me on LinkedIn at Burt Williamson. Just type in Burt Williamson on LinkedIn. You'll find me that way. Facebook, same way. So happy to connect. And I don't do a lot of social media. So I'm very blessed to have Cameron inviting me on here to the podcast.
No, that's all right. That's all right. I appreciate it. Well, thank you so much.
I am starting a blog on my website, which is going to be more thoughts and talking about things kind of going off as I did a little bit earlier. It's not going to necessarily be finance, but it's going to be things to help people with their thinking, talking about ADHD or just thought processes and things like that.
Excellent. Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for coming on the Cameron Journal podcast.
Thank you for having me. And I hope your listeners all have a great rest of their day. And you too.
That's all for this episode of the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Visit us online at CameronJournal.com. We're on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I love to talk to my followers and listeners, so please feel free to get us on social media at Cameron Cowan on Twitter. And we'll see you next time on the Cameron Journal podcast. Thank you.